Well, my presenters, I believe that we are live in our webinar for Parenting for Resilience. I'm just popping over to double check that it looks like we have about 32 people joining us right now. We have about 160 plus people registered for this event. Plus a bunch of people potentially from the Brightworks school community who might be joining. So we'll see how those numbers do. For everyone who is here, this event is being recorded for replay later. My name's Aaron Eden, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Applied Tinkering. And Brightworks School in San Francisco, which is one of our programs, is hosting this event. I'm going to be mostly producing this event, and our three other presenters are going to be speaking. And I just want to give a technical point to the people watching that the way for you to interact is that there's a chat function. So if you click the chat button, you can enter questions in there or comments. If you have something you enter into the chat that you'd really like the panelists to discuss, please go ahead and mark it as a question, and that will flag it for me, and then I'll be able to bring it to our presenters, assuming we have time. Those. So without further ado, I want to introduce our three panelists and then hand it over to them. We have Mackenzie Price, who is the director of Brightworks School and Community at Brightworks. And then finally, we have Carlee Adamson, who is a trauma literacy specialist in trauma-informed practices, who's going to talk with us about her approach and what she's seeing in her work around how parents can best support kids and support themselves during these interesting times. So Mackenzie, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And I'm not hearing you, Mackenzie. Sorry. Let's see if you can go ahead. Oh, so yeah, nothing from Mackenzie right now. Anthony, you want to test your audio and do a little intro of Brightworks for us? I'm not hearing you either. Hey, everyone, welcome to the testing of a new webinar platform. You guys can all hear me, right? Carlee and Anthony and Mackenzie. So this will be interesting. Maybe this will be the Aaron show. So let's see how this goes. Carlee, are you, why don't you, yeah, you're also not hearing you. I'm going to go ahead and mute and unmute you. And, or I just muted you. Let's see if you can restart. Carlee, are you there? So unfortunately, not getting audio from Carlee right now either. I will go ahead and introduce Brightworks potentially while Mackenzie and others look into their audio issues. And so Brightworks School in San Francisco is an independent or private K-12 school where we're in our 9th year, and we're located in the Inner Richmond district. Our approach is very child-centered. It's very co-creative and equity-based. And a lot of the work that we're doing right now as we pivoted early to distance education and working with our families is to really make it our curriculum to work with kids and parents for everyone to really understand what's happening right now, what all of our needs are, as a community, as kids, members of a class, and teachers, and school administrators and parents, and really kind of co-create ways of having everybody meet our needs, including our school learning and other things, and have that be a big part of our curriculum. I am going to go ahead, panelists, and move us all to a new room. Everybody just go ahead and stay tuned. It's going to just move all of us to a new webinar room, and it's going to hopefully restart the audio. I'm not sure why I'm the only one whose audio seems to be working. So just hang tight. It might ask you to press the play webinar again once we move. Here we go.
All right.
Hello?
Hello?
So I'm hearing Anthony,
Hello.
and I'm hearing Mackenzie, and
Hello.
I'm hearing Carlee.
Great.
I think this works. Yay.
Yay.
Wonderful.
Hey, long live the panic button.
Yay,
I'm gonna.
Aaron. We don't see you, but now we do.
There you are. Okay.
I just started. So welcome back, everyone. If you didn't realize, this webinar is actually to induce trauma. That's what we're trying to do.
We're just going to practice.
Just joking. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie now, and she's going to do a little more intro to Brightworks, and then we're going to hand over to Carlee and hear some of what she's finding in her practice. Mackenzie, why don't you go ahead?
Great. Carlee, we're so pleased to have you here today. I feel like with our project-based approach at Brightworks, which is a K-12 school, it doesn't work unless kids can bring their whole self to school. And that means their identity, their baggage. And so it is so important in these times of great change and uncertainty that we start first with taking care of our students' well-being and internal life. And so we're so pleased to have you here to help our parent community and our educator community really reflect on what it means to be resilient in times of great change like this, and how we can bring trauma literacy to our own lives and practices as parents and educators. So thank you so much for joining us. And tell us more about trauma literacy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always honored and also really grateful when school communities and parents, and now so much more in partnership, are asking questions about how to be more responsive to all of who our children are. So thank you. It's an honor. And to all folks attending, I just want to, before I do much introduction, just want to acknowledge that even just being on a computer is stress inducing. Our bodies, we're human, we're social creatures. We're used to gathering data about how people are feeling and how people are responding to us, and whether or not even we're okay or safe from people's bodies. And we don't have access to them right now. I can't see your faces. And we look at each other, we are, without even using conscious energy, we get so much information from being in rooms together that we can't get right now. And so I just want to acknowledge that and offer sort of an approach to just even getting a little bit more into the room together by just doing a little bit of an orienting practice. My background is in somatics, which is the best English word we have for the understanding that the mind and the body aren't separate. It's the body in its wholeness. It's a Greek word for the body in all of what it is, all of what it carries. And so the idea of somatic psychology is that if we can bring our bodies into integrity with our minds and our spirits and all that we are, that we can live more fully, and that we can actually be more present and be more response able. So that's sort of the premise. So I just want to offer a quick, I call it an orienting practice, and recognizing that everything that is happening right now in the world and just the reality of being parents brings with it a charge because the stakes are high, and there's potential threat if we do the parenting wrong, if we do the schooling wrong, if our child doesn't get exactly what they need, there's a threat. And that comes with a charge. Our bodies experience charge. And when there's a charge, we become slightly dissociated, even if we don't mean to or want to, even if we have really great mindfulness practice. When a charge hits, we become slightly dissociated. And one approach to just noticing and accepting that, and then also doing something about it, is literally just to orient. And so I want to invite you to just look around your room where you are, take your eyes off the screen, and actually turn your whole torso and just look at the walls, look at the ceiling, look at the three-dimensionality, look to both sides of you, look above you and below you, and just notice that, at least in this moment, probably a tiger's not chasing you. And there's a reality to the fact that our brains, when there's threat, act as though we're being chased by a tiger. And if we can show our brains that even though there is imminent existing threat, that in this moment, we're not being chased by a tiger, that our brain can actually settle and we can reclaim access to our better thinking, our better decision making, our compassion, the things that we most want to model for our children. So this just very simple, get your eyes off the screen and remind your brain that you are not being chased anytime. It's in my toolkit. Very often I have a small child who I am often afraid is going to literally die because he does not control his bodily impulses yet. So just to see how that feels. Is it okay? Is it a yes, a no, a maybe? And with anything I share today, I just want to invite yes, no, maybe. And hopefully to add some things to your framing and your toolkit this evening. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk for maybe, hopefully no more than eight minutes. And then I think we're going to open it up to questions. And I know that some participants already submitted questions, and I think we'll also be able to address some of the questions in the chat. But I want to give some framing for why I take a trauma lens as an approach to my understanding of what resilience is in life and parenting and teaching. I'm a career educator. I've been a middle school teacher for 15 years. I've been coaching high school teachers for the past 5 years. I'm a mother of a toddler. And I'm the founder of Trauma Literacy, which is a curriculum and a consulting business where I work with mostly schools and also parents to support the sort of systems integration of what we understand about trauma and behavior and trauma and learning. So I'm going to share a little bit of that framework because I think it can allow us to have some common language. And I'm going to share a presentation. You also hopefully received a 4-page handout that has a lot of this information in it. So hopefully you can just sort of sit back and see what lands with you. And I just want to sort of start before I show any slides with my definition of resilience for whatever it's worth, which is not that you know how to do things the first time you have to do them. Resilience is the ability to sort of reflect on what allowed you to get through, what allowed any of us to get through hardship, and the ability to understand and to integrate that understanding. How did we survive that really hard situation? And how can I apply that learning to the next time I encounter hardship? That's resilience. And so with that, I just want to offer some ways of thinking about children's behavior and how to sort of cultivate a little bit more give in our own reserves, and also how to support our children in cultivating that in themselves. So can everyone see the slides? No. Okay, start. That would be good. Yes. Okay, great. Let's see next. Okay. So I come to the term trauma literacy very much from the same understanding of language literacy, which has a lot to do actually with the ability to both communicate and understand. And communicate and understand, and then be able to respond to another. And so trauma literacy, I believe, is sort of foundational to language literacy and all kinds of other literacy, because it is the limit to which we can hear each other, and we can really put down our own baggage so that we can fully experience the other, and we can sort of fully experience ourselves. And so this idea it comes with it what I call responsibility, the ability to respond instead of react to situations that trigger us, and really understanding the ways that trauma and also stress, we've become habituated to react in certain ways. The first step to literacy is recognizing those. And I think that these conditions that we're living in have put some of those patterns, our coping strategies, our what I call survival strategies, in our faces, because we can't escape. We can't escape in our normal ways. We can't distract ourselves in our normal ways. So many of us are really feeling those patterns that may not really, we don't necessarily like them. They don't necessarily accomplish the things that we we're trying to accomplish, but we're doing them anyway. And our children are reflecting them back to us in some really painful ways. So I just want to acknowledge that I know for me, I imagine for many of us, we're sort of in it right now. And that stage of literacy development is necessary and also probably the most uncomfortable. My teacher calls it conscious incompetence, when we're aware of a pattern and we have no idea what to do differently and we can't escape. So we're just looking at it. And as parents, we want to be experts. Our kids look at us, they want us to know what to do. As teachers, very similar. So how do we approach this? And so step one is with curiosity and compassion. And I have a picture here of a Japanese pot. This is a form of Japanese art where they take broken pottery and they fill the cracks with gold. And it's considered a very high art form because they're considered more beautiful right after they've been reconfigured. And I quote Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So these places in us that feel broken, that feel redundant, that feel like we can't escape, there's a reason for that. And it's also potentially the greatest potential we have for healing lives in those places. So why? I'm hitting the wrong button. So here's a little bit about why. And it looks like because this is a different platform, my feed-ins are not going to work. So please excuse, I'll try to talk through, but excuse, there should be layers to the presentation, but it's not working. That's okay. So what do our brains need in order for us to be able to act differently? I could give you a list of, do this and then do this and then do this with your child, or set up this schedule, or and I see a lot of parenting workshops right now that have these very concrete offerings, and those are very useful, and we'll talk about some of them. But much like implementing things like social emotional learning or mindfulness, if we don't actually know how to practice and embody the things that we're talking about with our children, they learn only really what we do and very little about what we say. And so our brains, and this comes from now multiple sort of neuroscience fields, so psychology and neuroscience are sort of coming together with an understanding that our brainstem is identical to the brains of reptiles. And it is connected to our vagus nerve, which runs through our entire nervous system. And it controls all of our basic functions, our organs, our digestion, even our eyesight. And when it gets triggered, when we perceive a threat, the only part of our brain that is activated is that part. And it, by its nature, shuts down our human parts. It shuts down the mammalian part of our brain, which is our emotional center and our relational center. And it shuts down our neocortex, which is the part that has sort of higher order thinking. So we would call this amygdala hijack. When your amygdala hijacks the rest of your brain, it doesn't matter what schedule you have. It doesn't matter what task list of things you've decided to do. You have lost the ability to learn from what's happening and also to reason, and probably even to talk in some form. However, we have this incredible capacity as humans to, in the absence of when these situations are not happening, we have the ability to reflect on them, to watch what happens in our bodies, and to actually learn approaches that help us mitigate the impact of amygdala hijack on our brains. So the first thing we can do is things like orienting, telling our bodies that we're safe. We can do different presencing exercises. We'll try to do one more in a little while. The second thing that our brain tries to do when we perceive a threat is look for safe relationship, because we are mammals. And if we perceive a safe relationship, our reptile brain actually will not take over. we will be able to resettle our systems, which is why the number one resiliency factor that's common across populations where we study resilience is at least one positive, what we would call an attachment relationship. So the need right now, which is so intense for safe relationship, is it's never been more important, because the ways that we perceive social safety have sort of been stripped away. And in the absence of ways to connect across this sort of fabric of humanity that we feel we are together, we lose that buffer to traumatization, which is where our family relationships and also the things that we can facilitate for our children in terms of staying connected to each other, even in these weird times, are so critical. So with that, I just want to introduce sort of a lens on how to recognize survival behavior. And the reason for this lens is very, very often what's at the root of interactive patterns that seem dysfunctional or seem really challenging with our children, is a misunderstanding of the needs that they're expressing, and a misunderstanding of how to meet those needs, because we often project our own experiences onto our children, and they often are not like us in the ways that we would think they would be. So I'm going to just very briefly explain this graphic. I'm not going to read all the definitions, but I do want to name that from Gabor Mate, stress consists of internal alterations, visible or not, that occur when an organism perceives a threat to its existence or well-being. So there's lots of perceived threat right now. And it's not just perceived, it's real, right? And then there's also things that we can't see, that if an individual perceives something as a threat, it's not up for debate. It is a threat, and it is impacting their physiology. So our job as caring adults is to figure out what is causing the stress and to do our best to mitigate it. The same for ourselves. And obviously, we can't make the virus go away, but we can do things to protect ourselves, protect each other, and also keep ourselves as oriented to the present moment as possible. Trauma, however, occurs when there's a breach in our protective barrier. So this graphic of the river, of the boat, and the boat being sort of our bodies going down the stream of life, the boat being our experience of life. When we navigate around rocks or boulders or rapids, that's stress. And we have to sort of mobilize to figure out how to get through. And resilience comes when we can look back and figure out how we navigated. And then the next time we hit those rapids, we kind of have fun, or we know how to navigate around them. And our ability to experience life even expands from that experience. But when we experience a trauma, when the sort of protective barrier from overstimulation gets ruptured by an experience, and this can happen for any reason, when the demands made on a person exceed their ability to navigate them, they experience being pulled out of the stream of life. And this can so there's 4 things under here that you're not going to get to see, but they're in your handout. So this can be experienced a lot of ways, but essentially we get pulled out of the stream and into sort of a vortex. And if we survive, then we end up back in the river. We're not sure how we got there, and we know that thing could happen again. And we end up doing one of 2 things, either mobilizing tons of energy to try to avoid having that experience again. And so our life can get narrower and narrower and narrower because we don't want to go there, and we don't want to see that person, and we don't want to have that thing again. And we're constantly trying to manage the fear of that event happening in the future. Or we mobilize a ton of inner resources, and we develop what we would call a counter vortex. So we keep encountering the trigger over and over, and we know how to get out of it. But basically, most of our life force energy is being devoted to either getting out of the vortex or avoiding the vortex. Now, the beauty of understanding how our bodies teach us about this is that we can start to develop practices that help us actually titrate. So there's stored energy in the body every time we have one of these experiences. We can start to recognize when we're exhibiting these different behaviors, either stressed behaviors or traumatized behaviors. And we can actually ask for help in very particular ways and also give ourselves help in very particular ways. So I want to just offer a framework. I'm not going to talk through the whole thing. It's something that that takes it's a day-long experiential work to really embody. But I want to share it just as a lens as you start to watch the dynamics between your own actions and what's happening with your children. That we imprint ideas about how to get safe very early, and that all behavior is either an expression of pure vitality, life force, energy, or it's an expression of an attempt to get safe. And so if we start looking at our children and our own behavior from this lens, we can see that basically fight, flee, and freeze are not the only survival strategies or safety strategies that exist. There are a few more. And that we've probably been practicing them since we were really small, since like our earliest experiences of threat. And they may well have worked for us when we were babies to get our parents' attention or to get what we needed. However, they may have ceased to work, or we are using them in ways that are harming others, right? So in your packets, there's a full spreadsheet of sort of a description of each of these patterns. But essentially, when we perceive a threat, we usually mobilize a response either as a fight, a flee, a freeze, and appease. So we try to make whatever is the threat like us, or feel like not threatened by us. We do what they want. We try to make them feel better so that they don't threaten us. Or dissociate. We like sort of check out of our bodies. And these patterns, we can vacillate between them, we can switch them around. But the most important thing I think for parents to understand is that as parents, we probably have one or two of these patterns that we do often when we're under stress. And if we're experiencing a trauma, we might actually get stuck in this pattern and not be able to come out of it. And our children may actually have very different stress patterns or survival patterns. So how can we recognize what they're telling us and not so much do to them what we want done for us, but actually try to figure out what actually helps them to feel safe again? So that's sort of the most important understanding that I think as a parent, as a teacher. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Carlee, you froze for me, and I just wanted to make sure I was going to connect with the crowd, but you go ahead. I'll mute.
Okay. No, I didn't. Where did I freeze? Okay, I can't hear you.
No, you did. Yeah.
I was just and say, so to begin with just an inquiry into, sort of what of these strategies do you as a parent engage most often? And which ones do your children engage most often? And what responses, when you're exhibiting these symptoms, what responses work best for you? And which ones work best for your children? And they may very well not be the same. And if they're not the same, who do you know who's more like your child, who you could inquire? What works when, right? Starting to build a community that way, because we all know people and we all often have dynamics in our relationships that I think at the heart of them is a mismatch in terms of our survival patterns. And what one person perceives as safety is a threat to the other person. And so if we can get underneath that and start to really just observe and reflect, we can start to shift. So the move from conscious incompetence to conscious competence comes with this time of integration, of really trying to understand how we might have different ways of expressing this need for safety and different ways of needing to be shown that we've been heard, so that our systems can settle and our higher thinking minds can come back online. So this is an overview of this sort of pattern understanding, which you can look at more closely as it relates to you and your children. But I want to pause here, and I think we can open it up to some questions. If that's okay.
Carlee, that was wonderful, and I have a few questions I wanted to ask before we open it up for the floor. I really noticed that something that you said that struck me was the conscious incompetence. And I feel like that's something that we're all suffering from, just as we're trying to figure out what the right way through is in an experience that we really have no prior knowledge. We have the knowledge that it is a trauma, and these things you're saying are so important. But what I'm noticing for our family and our communities is, in noticing that, I'm noticing a lot of noticing that, but then it feels like it almost compounds the feelings that we're having that we're inadequate, or it adds trauma to it. Mm-hmm. And so it's really interesting just like being with our families, because I want to tie that to another point you made. It's establishing those safe relationships for all of us. And it's like what it looks like as I express it as a father to my son, and what my son expresses to me, or with our families, is really interesting. So I would love if you could just like tease that one out a little bit more, because I think that conscious incompetence is really important to recognize, but what are some good ways you see through, or ways mm-hmm. out, or just what are practices you would encourage?
Yeah. So the reason why I love this framework is because it helps me it holds a sort of a third point for conversation. Like, oh, I'm noticing that you are fuming, you're turning bright red. I'm noticing my fists are clenched, right? Just to start to be able to reflect, not even on emotions, because emotions require abstract language that we don't have access to when we're triggered. So really just starting to articulate what is being felt, both for ourselves and what we're noticing in each other. Because just saying, I see that your eyes have glazed over. I'm imagining that you're feeling really annoyed with me right now, or I imagine that you don't want to have it. You seem really upset. Can be an opening to a child being able to say, no, actually, I'm distracted, or I'm, just giving them some acknowledgement that you are seeing them and you are listening to their bodies, and that you're not expecting them to give you anything. And this is a mistake I think as teachers we often make, is we expect respect and we expect sort of these like ways of being, but we don't necessarily offer them. And so in this case in particular, how can we make sure that our children feel seen and also model the same thing, right? Like when you are noticing that you're feeling so overwhelmed, like you can just say, my stomach is really tight, I'm clenching my jaw, it hurts, I don't know what to do right now, I'm really confused, I'm going to take a minute, right? And just starting to like get down to the body level, because that's something we all have access to and it's in the room anyway. And when we try to ignore it and go straight to like, are you sad? Are you hungry? We bypass the actual felt experience. So the first step is really making space for everybody in your home to have a felt experience and acknowledge it. And then really look at what are the ways in which each different person in your family feels felt, because it's going to be different depending on what their ways of seeking safety are. So that's a beginning answer to your question.
Well, no, that's really good, because something we're noticing is that new patterns of behavior are showing up in all of us. And I think that point you made about bypassing it, like, oh, you're angry or this, and I think not actually acknowledging just that change in actual body physiology, right, or just what you're doing has been, I think, a mistake that has been common to all of us as we've tried to be mm-hmm. more solutions-based. But mm-hmm. I think that actual acknowledgement of the actual thing that is happening, both in us and with our child, right, and how to model that, I think is really, really helpful advice.
Right. And I'll add, go ahead.
I kind of I want to hear what you have to add, but then I have a question mm-hmm. to kind of build upon your answer.
So I was just going to add, I'm really fascinated right now because I also have a 2-year-old. And so like in the side, on the side of COVID and my work with schools and with teens, which most of my work has been with teens, I have a 2-year-old who is still developing his prefrontal cortex, right? He doesn't have the abstraction of like feelings or emotions. He has pure felt experience. And my approach to him from, just sort of my own training has always been to allow his temper tantrums and to encourage them to just say like, wow, I see you're super frustrated right now. And I like growl with him and I try to mirror very authentically what I think he's experiencing, and he gets over them really quickly, I think, because he feels felt. To remember that even our older children and even us right now, because we're going through something we've never gone through before, it's as if we're developing a new part of our being human. And so in that way, we have to give ourselves permission to be developmentally like where our toddlers are. That like these and so then the question comes, where's room for the uncomfortable feelings that our society doesn't make room for? The rage and the grief that we don't, as a culture, we haven't done a good job of encouraging or making room for, and the ways that we've done that historically are now not available. So that's a real question. I have some. I'll share some ideas, but I want to hear your question, Mackenzie.
Yeah. So I just want to represent some of the families that I've heard who, their way of coping with trauma or even trying to engage with a kid might be different than what that kid's capable of. Like kids who aren't very verbal, who don't really like to talk about their feelings and process.
Yeah.
How can we find a space in which to meet them?
Right.
And yeah.
And so that's where, again, I find this sort of animal archetypes framework really helpful, because there's nothing wrong with the fact that we work through hardship differently from our children, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the question is, can we see it? And and this is sort of the art of parenting, can we get ourselves grounded enough to actually be able to respond in the way that our child needs, not in the way that we would respond, and to not think that there's something wrong with them because they don't respond the way that we do. And this is, I think, at the heart of so many of our children feeling desperately hopeless, is because there's just this miss. There's a way in which they internalize that because they don't meet the world the way their parents do, there's something wrong with them. And it's just not true. But we are not equipped as parents with a way of looking at their behavior as simply, they're just trying to get safe. How can we listen? And so, the workshop that I walk people through when I have more time is actually to have everyone sort of do a self-assessment and identify what their coping strategies are, and actually workshop and share with each other for each of these different ones, what are you asking for? And the lions will all say, like, either get out of my face or listen to me, right? You really need to be able to hear me. And that's really scary for a parent who is a hummingbird. If they have a lion child who's like screaming at them, they dissociate. And so we have these ways where our patterns are at odds with each other. If I'm the parent and I have this is my situation, I dissociate. My kid is screaming and I check out of my body, and then he screams more because he can't find me. So I have to ground. I have to find a way to get in my body. And the way I do that is by literally putting my hands on the ground, putting my feet on the ground, feeling the chair that's holding me under my body, and using everything in me to stay with him so that he knows that I'm not leaving, because he actually needs to be witnessed in his rage. And now that gets harder. Teenager, right? Because their rage can be really, really intense and also potentially violent. And if they feel that you are recognizing that because they're enraged, something is actually legitimately wrong, they're not making it up, they will feel safer. They will start to be able to calm down. It's when we try to talk them out of their own rage that they become more enraged. So it's these sort of ways of identifying that when a child is seeking safety, it is literally because they feel unsafe. and we can't talk them out of that. We have to make them feel safe, however that is for them. And so when they're not triggered, talk to them about it. What makes them feel safe? Who makes them feel safe? That makes them feel safe. What does safety feel like in their bodies? How do they know they feel safe? And start to put together a family toolkit for each person, right? These are our resources. Each person has different ones. Mindfulness meditation practice is not going to work for everybody. Yoga is not going to work for everybody. Singing is not going to work for everybody, but everybody's going to have some that they can go to. Those kinds of things.
Carlee and team, just want to flag that there's a question in the chat that I think might be a good time to ask, just about whether any of these coping strategies can be useful and healthy means to react to trauma, and should we be trying to change coping strategies?
Good.
Or so that I just want to flag that it's there. You don't have to necessarily answer it now, but it felt like it might fit in this.
It's a great question.
And I wonder if, I feel like that last slide that we kind of skipped out of, when I was reading through it, it has so many good gems. So maybe as you answer this, we could put that slide up. Wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. So I have a bias. And so I guess depending on your background, there are two ways that this framework came into sort of Western consciousness. And one way is through a student of Freud who was watching him do psychoanalysis. And Freud initially had a definition of trauma that was very similar to the one I just shared with you, and then abandoned it and said, no, actually everybody just has these latent sexual desires. And he basically wrote off all of his patients as if there was just something fundamentally broken about humans, and we were just and his student took what he observed and created a framework that has these 5 personality patterns, 5 patterns of coping with trauma. And what he saw was that actually each one had an incredible amount of resiliency within it, right? And a ton of assets. So there are strengths right in the middle of this slide where it's the strengths of the pattern, right? And we don't want to do away with these. In fact, we actually want to learn how to embody all of them, right? So it would actually be really great for us to bridge the ability to sort of act in the asset side of each of these patterns for sure. And there's a way in which if we don't have choice about when we engage these patterns, and we think that they're our personality, or we think that this is just what I do, this is just how I am, we have no choice, that we become victim to them, and we can actually do a lot of harm to ourselves and each other. So that's sort of the intent, definitely. And the other side of where this information came from is it maps very carefully onto one interpretation of the chakra system in sort of Eastern psychology. So there's a great book called Eastern Body, Western Mind that talks about where these ideas come together in the body, that would purport that actually we have a soul mission that would determine which of these patterns we're sort of engaging, because it's what we're here to learn. And then that maps with a lot of Western psychology, which says that our sort of our core wound is also right next to our greatest gift, right? So yes, there's so much and that's why I think this is such a rich framework to engage individually and then also as a family, because there's so much potential for healing and also for greater seeing of each other. Each of these has a gift, and really the gift is that they perceive unsafety in very nuanced ways, and we can teach each other a lot about what is balance and what is harmony, what is integrity, if we really listen to each other.
Thanks, Carlee. But yeah. So I had another question, just listening to you and just kind of building upon that. I really love the notion of responsibility, and changing that, because I feel like part of making that space is confounding our need to react or to jump in and to assign a feeling or assign an emotion. And so this notion of responsibility I really like it because I think when we allow ourselves times to pause enough, we can probably like recover some of these tools that are lost in that kind of animal brain of reaction or just like problem solving. So how, like, what are some good practices you've come by to help, you know, build that like ability? Because that's a hard one, because it's that split second thing that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between a reaction and a response is literally that fast.
Yep.
And then how, like, what is the way to like kind of open up those spaces for understanding? Because I feel like what you're describing is this really beautiful way to at least begin understanding, right? Because like it seems like it's patient work to do this and to like really commit to these tools. But yeah, what are the good ways that you help people learn this ability of responsibility?
Yeah. So so the first step, right, is the awareness, which is the hardest part, right? The second is actually the cultivation of this idea of resources, right? So coming to understand what are the things that make us feel safe. There are inner resources, there are outer resources, right? There's the things we can look at in our space that help us remember that we're not just this whatever it is that we're experiencing right now, but that there's more, that we are more. There are the people that have made us feel most ourselves. There are the experiences where we've felt strength, and literally like writing these things down so that we can remember them when we need a quick, like, I have to remember that I am more than just this reaction, right? And then also starting to explore the body. So the way trauma works is wherever in our bodies we experienced the trauma, we have some level of there's a freeze response that happens. We move through, when there's a trauma, we move through fight or flight. We realize we can't escape. We experience in our bodies a threat to our existence. And if we don't get really good coaching to come through that, to recognize that we're still alive, and to allow our bodies, like animals would do, to shake and to laugh and to cry and to become alive again, like an animal would do if they got escaped from being attacked by a predator. We don't do that. We tell ourselves we're okay, and our bodies hold everything about that experience. And we start to experience pain, or we start to experience illness because our bodies can't move freely. So starting to notice where in our bodies are stuck, feel tense, feel what are those places, and where in our bodies actually don't, where in our bodies feel okay, calm, present, grounded, because they exist simultaneously. And the problem with trauma is that when we get stuck in it, the vortex, we think that's all that exists. We relive it and we project it into the future. So as soon as we can create a little more space around it by noticing my little finger feels okay right now, my big toe feels okay right now, I am sitting in a chair that is not moving. Those things actually can, and if we can move our attention between the experience of the vortex and the experience of present, this is called pendulation in Peter Levine's language, then we can actually start to diffuse this habituated reaction. And that energy, we'll feel it. We'll feel tingling. We'll feel a sigh. We'll feel a yawn. We'll cry. We'll shake. It can be really subtle. And we can do this ourselves. And we can teach our children that these are ways to just start to put a little more space around the reaction.
Well, it's beautiful to me because it opens up a space for new possibility.
Right.
Because I think we've all gone down the road of just going back and forth in there. And so any of these things literally open up like some light. If we're going to use your Leonard Cohen quote, which is always good to have Leonard Cohen handy when you're like trying to feel mellow. Or, you know, just like this whole idea. And I think that's the thing, because like everything you're saying, it's like we're building something, and we're continually building something, and we're being agile with something.
Yep.
And I think this notion that we're going to get it right every time it happens, or do it perfectly, or reflect on it correctly is kind of a futile one if we don't understand that it's a constant work and a building of possibility.
Right.
Oh, but I really enjoyed that last set of answers. I enjoy everything you say, but these last two are really sticking in my
I'm
brain
so
real good right now.
Thank you.
I see some good questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a producer for today's event, I just want to flag that we have about 10 minutes left. And there are a couple questions that have popped in. Clearly, as Carlee said, this, this kind of work is often, multi-day workshops to really, really dive in and experience it. But I think we have time for maybe, one or two kind of either pointed questions or the ones that people submitted as we were, I've heard you trying to respond to some of the questions people submitted, before as well. But so just want to flag we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to leave it to you three to, figure out how to use that time. Before we head off, though, because I don't want to cut you off in the middle of you speaking, but just want to say that in the handout, if you didn't see the files button on the controls of your browser, there's the handout that has much of this information from Carlee. It has her contact information. Carlee does, I think, private and group coaching and works with schools and various things. Carlee and I have worked together before. And then also there's contact information for Brightworks school in San Francisco, K-12 school on there, where this is work that we take very seriously as well. So I'm going to leave it for you three to finish off with whatever you can see the questions in there, address what you think is best. Someone's asking to hear from Mackenzie, nothing in particular. I guess we just want to hear Mackenzie's voice. So go ahead.
I can't hear you.
Not hearing Mackenzie again. Okay.
How about
Anthony?
Can I read a couple of the questions? Because I feel like my mic has the least amount of feedback for whatever reason, which is usually the opposite in my normal life. But we'll go with it today. I'm going to take Ida's question for you, Carlee. I'm listening as both a teacher and a parent. Do you have any advice for teachers about how we can best partner with parents in this work, especially as we consider the potential for continued remote learning next fall? This is a $1 million question in our school too. So take it away. I'd love this one.
I think that I would love to have a parent forum, and that's actually what I've encouraged the schools that I work with to do, is to just start to really ask parents what are they wanting, because I think there's this whole new terrain around bandwidth, literal bandwidth, like how much more can parents be engaged electronically, on phones when we want them to be with their children whenever possible. But I think that the relationship, right? Like this is where we're asking, we can't be in relationship with children as educators in the ways that we have, because we don't have them. We can't hug them. We can't, see them. We can't communicate with them in the ways that we have, even if they're logging in regularly and doing our work regularly, but their parents are with them. And so in many ways, like, how do we, as educators, shift our focus to being in partnership with parents? And that may mean different thinking about cohorts of students so that teachers actually can connect with a small group of parents consistently, and be a resource, in thinking about, and also, like, the feedback from parents is so important to schools right now. What is possible in that home? What is possible when there are 4 children or 3 children or multi-age or one child? What is possible when both parents are working? To really be an advocate and an ally and a partner and a resource for parents, I think is the primary role of teachers right now, which is a very different role for us, and challenging when that's not our training, and that's not, but it allows us to come together differently as educators, to think and to really take, and it's so important because this is information we've always needed, but didn't have to take so seriously when the students were sitting in front of us. What is happening in that home, and how can we really get behind our parents to get behind our kids?
No, I think it's been really interesting, just like meeting with so many parents, because like the need to actually have this communication is so so vital right now. And I think, I mean, we're really grappling with, you know, we're all feeling a sense of loss at our school, but we're feeling that there's this amazing challenge and call to really do this as best we can and do this. And what best we can is so different now, because we do think it starts with like loving and honoring the situations that all of our children and families are feeling in their homes. So it's so like important, like to have like, you know, comrades in arms like you, Carlee, because like these are giving us new things to work with. Because like also just like even in the stuff you're talking about, as all of us now have reps of being at home 24 straight hours, you know, 10 straight weeks, and it continues on and on. It's important that we remember there are these like tools out there, these resources out there, and to like rely on them and to like be vulnerable enough to ask for them or to share your stories. So I think it's so important, just these openings you're helping us all see right now. I'm going to take another question just because I want to hit. I always feel bad if I miss a question in these things. Tanya asks, how do you address exacerbated fears like fear of sleeping without a parent nearby, fear of dogs, etc., that such that the child feels safe? And I think that dovetails nicely into a lot of the things we've been talking about today.
Yeah. So in a short answer is, you know, the first exploration is what happens if we just take it seriously, right? What happens if we just assume that they need to feel safer and we don't question, is there something wrong? Is there, did I do something wrong to create this fear? And we just take it seriously and we find ways, right? We explore what ways will allow them to feel safe. Do they need to sleep with me again? And I know that's, you know, it has a whole set of ideas and interpretations I don't want to get into, but there's that. And then there's like really sometimes at the root of what seems like what we would see as an irrational fear is actually a trauma that we may not be aware of. It could be something that happened in utero. It could be part of a birth trauma. It could be something that happened when they were babies, that it may be just one time they cried and we weren't able to come, and they somehow internalized that they weren't safe. And there are ways to redo and to repair some of that, and that takes some professional support. So if you're feeling like it's something that you've tried all the ways you can think of, and you're trusting, you're giving them the space to trust that their fear is real. You're not problematizing it or trying to make them wrong or trying to talk them out of it. And you've really made space for that, and it's still not shifting. Then I would consult with someone, and I would really encourage somatic practitioners, because they understand the body, and they understand that the kid doesn't have to remember what happened, that there are ways to have the body talk through what it's trying to say and to rework it so they get back their sense of self.
Well, what a beautiful notion, though. Like I mean, if we take this challenge of all these new challenges that are in front of us, this notion that our children and us could actually understand each other and listen to each other more and actually acknowledge how we're feeling. And it's like, I mean, I think I suffer from a bit of optimism in my life, and just as we talk to parents all the time and do this stuff in these hard times. But it's really beautiful, Carlee, to just think about these are real chances to practice this most important work. And it's like the most valuable resource we have. And as you're saying, it's taxed and stressed and the unknown and all of our own trauma resources as the adults in the world. But I think it's things like this, and it's work that you do, and the kind of ideas that you're putting out here that give us hope that there is something to do right now. This isn't a time to simply get through. This is an actual time to lean in and to find these places with our most beloved, important things in the world, our family and our children. And so I feel so thankful and like kind of, I feel fortified to like take next steps into this. And I know like, I hope you come and visit us again, because like this is so helpful for all of us and me and just, I really want to just thank you for that message that we should really take each other seriously and find spaces for understanding and how to work with that. So thank you so much from all of us.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Yeah, Carlee, thank you so much. It's great to spend time with you again after a couple of years at least. And I want to thank everybody for joining. We had up to as many as 103 people with us during this. We have about 77 left, which is actually a very high stickiness. So thank you.
We only turned off 23 people. It's awesome. Those are the kind of math problems we like to have.
Hey, Mr. Optimism, come on. So everyone, thank you for joining. We at Brightworks, we do plan to have every couple of weeks something available, hopefully for the entire Bay Area and world, in addition to our own community. Hopefully Carlee will be able to come back and join us. There's so much to talk about here. There's so much work to be done. But the thing I really want to highlight that I think Anthony said as well is there's so much opportunity right now to reevaluate our relationship with everything, the way that we relate with the world. What's our autopilot, and is our autopilot still serving us? Our kids are doing the same thing. When we're home together, we have so many opportunities to iterate and to practice and to try with each other. Whereas when it's school and work, we might have 1 or 2 times a day. Mm-hmm. So evolution happens through iteration, right? And so we evolve as people and in our relationships when we iterate with each other a lot. We're not always going to be perfect in the way that we do it, but when we forgive ourselves and others and try again, and do things like joining workshops like this where we do readings, etc., to understand what are some tools we can use. So I really want to thank everybody for joining, for the work that everybody's doing to support kids right now, to support themselves, the other people in their lives. And we hope to see you again on another one of these. The video will be emailed to you once it's ready. Resources will be at sfbrightworks.org. And then you have Carlee's information as well. So everyone, please be well, take care, and we'll see you sometime soon. All the best.
Thank you all.
Bye.